Hey, African Queen family, how are you doing? This is us again. I am here with Susan Mathai. As you recall, she did a video on domestic violence homicide by Jane Mockton Smith. Today, we're going to be discussing a case of a Nigerian lady who died in the hands of domestic violence, in the hands of her husband. And her name is Osinachi, a very well-known gospel musician and very well respected, mother of three. And apparently, she lost her life. So I decided, let me call Susan again to try to help us understand whether we can trace, expect, or should I say, whether we can project whether a person could actually be violent or dangerous. We want to go through the whole scenario and see whether we can identify the stages and the red flags and whether she would have found a way out of it. Welcome, Susan, to the show. How are you doing? You're looking all nice and glamorous there.
Thank you, Maureen. I'm happy to be on the show. Yeah, and to discuss this particular case, like I said in my previous video, there are so many cases on social media. When you look at them, you can see all indicators that this relationship was not going to end well. Using the 8-stage timeline that was developed by Dr. Jane Mockton Smith. And this is what we're going to do with Osinachi's case. We're going to look at it and we're going to see, just track it. And this may provide you with useful information for yourself or for somebody that you know. My disclaimer, of course, is that I've gleaned this information from what we have found on about 10 or more YouTube sources and print media, which we found very useful for purposes of developing some sort of understanding of the situation. And so in other words, we're trying to collect evidence that would show us what was happening in her relationship with her husband, Peter.
Yeah.
And some of them were her twin sister, the eldest brother of Peter, a childhood friend, her pastor, Dr. Paul, her mother, a business associate, Prophet Stephen, and another one called Queenlet. There's also, there was an interview that was done, a background interview that was done on print media about Peter's own response to the situation. We also have Nigeria Insight channel, which did a biography. So it gives us some background about Osinachi. And of course, also the interviews that featured the women's representative who appeared in many interviews on YouTube regarding her own discussions with the children. So those are our sources. We were trying to collect information so that we could try and understand the situation and try to fit those different things that were happening in her life in the 8-stage timeline. So Osinachi's bio, what do we know about her? We know she was born in November 79 to a middle-class family, middle-class Christian family. She's one of 3 and one of a twin. Her twin sister is called Amarachi Grace. Her father was a pastor. She was a famed gospel singer, and she was raised in Enugu City, but lived with Peter in Abuja. She held a bachelor's degree and she broke into celebrity status in 2017. She has some famous songs which are sung even here in Kenya in church. Many churches in Kenya actually sing her music. So she's well known in many countries in Africa. She married Peter and they had 4 children, 3 girls and 1 boy. And she died in hospital on the 8th of April, 22. We don't have the autopsy yet. Well, rather it's not been shared with the public yet. So now some background, I'll just do a brief recap about the 8 stages of domestic violence homicide. Like I told, it was developed by Professor Jane Mockton Smith. She's a public safety professor from the University of Gloucestershire in the UK, and she specializes in homicide, coercive control, and stalking. In the course of her research, she was able to identify a consistent story that emerged from all those cases. And this is what she used to develop her 8 stage. This research is ongoing, and she actually does domestic homicide reviews. In the UK, when there's an incident of killing by an intimate partner, they have a review to sort of understand the situation. She has written a book. Her work has been well received globally. Like Maureen said earlier, I did some work. My first degree was in a Bachelor of Law, and I did, as in practice, I was practicing in family law, and I came across many cases of domestic violence.
Wow.
So the purpose of the 8-stage timeline, just to recap, is it helps one to identify the motivations of the perpetrator. In this case, the perpetrator is Peter. Peter is Osinachi's husband. The victim behavior, the victim in this case is Osinachi, and then control as being an essential for tracking risk. So this timeline helps us to track risks. The further you go up it, the higher the risk gets. So when we're looking at the control, we'll be looking at what we know about the situation, the relationship between Osinachi and her husband, and the control elements that are in it. And that's why we had to look, collect as much information as we could. It is not exhaustive. I am sure there's much more information out there.
Yeah.
So it is also, the 8-stage timeline is also a preventative framework. And why? It helps us to assess risk. Depending on which stage you are on along the timeline, you can tell the danger in which that particular person is in. So it also informs policy and practice. If we want to change the law or policies on domestic violence, it really helps to provide, to inform that process. And also it informs court processes and for protective orders. In many courts around the world, you can get protective orders against violence for various reasons. It also helps you to explain to the victim what is really happening in their lives. When they are able to actually listen to how the situation in their life is tracking very well along the 8 stages. And then it also enhances evidence collection. This enables whoever is developing a case to collect evidence to show really there was motivation on the part of the suspect to commit homicide or attempted homicide.
Yeah, so let me just interrupt slightly, Susan. When you say that it helps to inform the victim about what's happening to her, who would have that knowledge and who would be informing her? Would it assume that she'd be going for therapy or counseling? And that counselor would actually know about these 8 stages.
Necessary to go for counseling, like you said, and maybe to explain the process. And one thing that we really need to understand, there are 2 questions that are always asked in a domestic or intimate partner situation that results in violence or abuse. Is the first question, the victim is asked, what did you do? That is not a question you should be asking. The real issue is the perpetrator, the abuser. The problem is the perpetrator. It is not the victim's problem. So this timeline helps to debunk that thinking. It also helps to debunk the idea that homicide occurs in a red mist, in a fit of rage or anger that it is not thought about. This timeline actually demonstrates that homicide, often in domestic violence cases, is actually planned by the perpetrator. So when you talk about the victim becoming knowledgeable or understanding where they are, this is, like you said, in the context of counseling, and perhaps even as a friend who has been following this, studying this, it gives you some insight on how you should approach the subject with somebody you know who is a victim of this. And in fact, this situation has to be approached with a lot of sensitivity. Never ask them, why don't you leave? Because the truth of the matter is they can't. It is that bad. Coercive control is so, it just takes the person completely captive, and they live in a hostage situation. I'll discuss that more as I move on. So coercive control, like I said, it actually traps a person into a relationship so they cannot leave. They feel like they're in a hostage type situation, and they're terrified of provoking the other person because of the consequences. The violence threats to self, to you, to your children, to your parents, something they're doing that's making you so scared of not wanting to rock the boat.
Yeah.
So evidence of it in Osinachi's case. What did we see and what have we been able to collect? First of all, we know from Osinachi's own repeated comments that she had no intention of leaving her husband because of her faith and other factors. The other factors now are those issues I'm talking about. They could have been threats to her children, to her parents, to others which we are not aware of. There's a lot of information we still do not have about this case. In one situation, she had opportunity to leave because when she had her, I think it was her third child, her mother eventually was allowed to take care of the child after 3 months. There'd been a lot of complaints from neighbors that Osinachi was not being cared for. And eventually after 3 months, somebody was sent and was able to persuade Peter to allow Osinachi to go home to her mother for care. She stayed there for about a year with this child. And of course, it came to a point where Peter wanted her to return back. When she was asked, the mother said, this marriage is over, she told him. And Peter told the mother, threatened the mother. In the gist of what he told her, which I'll talk about later, was that either she comes home alive or dead. In other words, that was a threat. It speaks for itself. So Osinachi also was in some type of hostage situation. She was so afraid. She continuously told people to ask her husband to seek permission for him on things which an adult would normally do on their own, about business connections, where she's going to sing, where her money should be kept. She made no choices. She completely relinquished those to her husband. And all aspects of her life were under serious control of this man. And she was afraid of stepping out of the bounds. He controlled her finances, her communication. He even had the passwords to all her social media accounts. She had no access to them. And he completely isolated her from her family and friends. She had a great fear of provoking him. There was one incident where the music producer witnessed Peter slapping Osinachi. And she pleaded with him to keep quiet about it. Apparently, all the reports are that she would literally cry and go on her knees and tell them, please do not say anything. So she was in a deeply coercive, controlled situation. And as I told you earlier, this is an essential ingredient for proving domestic violence, and which leads to homicide at the end of the day. So this is, now let's go into stage one, the pre-relationship history. We're looking for, what are we looking for? Self-reported information, ex-partner information, information from family members. Does this person have a criminal record? And then I want to emphasize that the victim is not responsible for the abusive behavior of the perpetrator. This victim will get into problems even if they remain silent. It doesn't matter what they do, they are going to be, the treatment will be the same. So let's look at Peter, because he's the perpetrator. What do we know about him? So what we've been able to find out is that according to his brother, he changed his name. His real name is Okekenwa, not Nwachuku. The question is why? What is he hiding? The other thing is that he did not attend. His relationship with his family was not good at all. He sort of like cut them off, and he did not attend his father's funeral. He did not, it was found out that he had a first wife or another wife. His son apparently found a photo album in his rooms with a picture, a wedding photo of him with another lady. He did not have a close relationship with his own family. Last communication from the video that I watched said it was about 20 years before. He also claimed to be a pastor. Wolf in sheep's clothing, I don't know. Okay. And also later on, we'll find out that a neighbor and a husband to a close friend of Osinachi was very concerned that even after her demise, he seemed not to show any remorse or sorrow that you'd expect from a grieving spouse. Yeah. Okay. The next stage is the meeting. So we have established a history of what this man was like. One thing we know about him is that there's not much we know about him, which should be a big question mark. He seemed to have disconnected himself from anybody who would help us to understand who he was. So the second stage is the meeting. And what do we see here? We see that the perpetrator, in this case, Peter, is more intense than intended partner, paranoid, jealous, possessive, and he desires to move the relation very quickly into exclusivity. And how does he do that? Wants them to move in pregnancy, marriage. Why? The objective is to obtain commitment. And please note this, once commitment is given, you cannot withdraw it and it cannot be relinquished.
Yeah.
So these people who, in these type of situations are literally trapped.
Yeah.
So what did Peter do? What do we know about what Peter did?
He talked to her sister, right?
Yeah. Yes, he did. Actually, they met at a gospel singing show. Yeah. It was, they met at a gospel singing show. And Peter was literally very obsessed with Osinachi from word go. He wanted to marry her. She rebuffed his attention. He tried to access her through her twin sister, Amarachi, who was also there, did not succeed. But all of a sudden and very quickly, he seems to have pursued her after they met at the gospel show. Next thing Amarachi, this is the twin sister, knows is that he has already paid bride price and he's marrying the Osinachi. And according to her, she says there was no courtship. This is a red flag immediately. Wow. No, he decided and he moved very quickly into commitment. So there was no courtship. So he paid bride price, he did this, he did that, and he even excluded Amarachi from being a chief bridesmaid. So she was cut off completely from it. So here are the red flags. Then the next thing is the relationship itself. Now they are married. These type of relationships are characterized by control, manipulation, gaslighting, threats, violence. So what is control? What are they controlling? They can control the clothes, money, work, relationships with family, communication. They can isolate you. Manipulation, they do all types of things to make sure that you cannot leave them. Gaslighting, they make you mistrust your sense of judgment. Threats to self-harm, threats to themselves, to harm themselves, or something like that. Now, what do we know about this relationship? We know that Peter controlled her money.
Yep.
Osinachi had no bank account of her own.
Seriously?
He collected all her earnings. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, he collected all her earnings. He negotiated all her engagements. He was involved in everything. Even when traveling, there was one really heartbreaking story given by a childhood friend, and she used to sing with, and I think she's referred to as one of her best friends. How she traveled.
Queen.
No,
okay.
There's another. Yes, there's another lady.
Oh.
So she says that she flew to a place where this friend lives to do some ministry. So she had the ticket to arrive to the place. She had she could not call. When she arrived there, she had to call Peter, and then Peter told her, get a taxi. So she gets a taxi. Peter himself directed the taxi driver to where she was going to stay.
So the taxi driver, no money.
Yes. And then the place where she was supposed to stay, he only paid for board, no food.
Wow.
So she had to go and look for food. So this best friend, actually, she was in tears. She was saying, I live in this area. Come and stay with me. But Osinachi could not go and stay in her friend's house. So also ministry, he had to approve everything that she did. There were many stories of how he would frustrate her work, cancel gigs, refuse to allow them to happen. Communications, she was completely isolated. He had access to all her passwords. He was controlling that. He limited visits to friends. The mother said that after her marriage, she saw her after 2 years.
Imagine.
And and he dictated even who was going to be her chief bridesmaid. He vowed to cut the twin sister off from her sister. And the only way that Osinachi could be with her twin sister was to arrange for them to sing together. And she did that. And the twin sister talks about it, and she says that Osinachi was unable even to finish the song because she was crying as they were singing, and Amarachi completed the song. That was the only way they could meet. This man would not allow the twin sister into the house. She would not allow her to visit. She would not allow her to go anywhere near. She was so the mother also had received many reports from neighbors that these things are not well with Osinachi. And so when she was allowed to stay with, when Osinachi was allowed to stay with the mother by Peter, the mother asked her about her relationship with Peter. And Osinachi completely denied abuse. That is a telltale sign, because it's obvious to others something's happening, but that person is denying it. So violence. We also had, there was a history of violence, repeated acts of violence meted out. He was violent even in front of the children. They even reported incidents where he would tell the children to beat their mother. He slapped her in front of a music producer because she wanted to sing the song in Igbo. And this was known by neighbors. And these are the incidents of violence. But that's
let me just interrupt slightly and ask you, do you think that she was communicating through her music? Do you think this is the reason why that this guy wanted to even know whether her music, like there are times when she would say, have you asked my husband? My husband has to listen to the song first and approve it. Yeah. And then he'll tell me. What do you think? Do you think that she was escaping into her music, or she was trying to communicate through her music, what she was going through?
I don't know why he didn't want her to sing in Igbo. We don't have the information, but she was slapped because she wanted to sing in Igbo. Definitely the gospel music that we sing in Kenya is, it is in her mother tongue, some of it, and then it translated, it's in part in the mother tongue and then in English as well. So you can get translations of all the words. And she did collaborations with some famous gospel singers as well, and some of the songs, those are the songs that we know. But her last song, I listened to it, and it was released on 6th of April. A beautiful song called, I think, is a something, but it's a very beautiful song. I listened to it, and she had a wonderful voice, wonderful.
Passionate.
Yes.
Extremely passionate.
Very beautiful.
Very
beautiful voice.
Oh, very unique. Oh, it's very painful, that loss.
So apart from the violence, there was also emotional abuse. He would mock her. The reports of him mocking her, locking her out of the house. These are methods that they use to control. These people, like I told you, this is about the perpetrator. These are methods they use to control. And like I mentioned earlier, coercive control, one feels like a hostage. You're in a place where you can't get out. You're trapped. And they use all methods to play with your mind and to make you not trust your ability to think and even make decisions. And that is why when somebody asks a person like that, why don't you leave? They really can't.
Because she can't trust her own judgment.
So nobody, if you want to help somebody in that situation, never ask them that question. No, you make suggestions, you do your research. If you're a good friend, find ways to converse with her, point them to a counselor who can perhaps really ask them questions and make suggestions. Don't you think perhaps, but never ever tell them to leave. They can't. They can't.
Yeah.
And you'll break communication with them, but keep yourself open to have a conversation, as a friend and a relative who really cares. Keep yourself open to continuous flow of information. Don't be judgmental. Just listen and try to and when if they make a decision to leave, you should make sure that that you're able to support them in a way that will not be a danger to them or to anybody else, because these characters follow. There are cases where they kill, and they can even kill an entire family because you tried to. Yeah, they're very dangerous, actually. So like the emotional abuse is what I was talking about, and there was evidence of that in Osinachi's case. He would lock her out of the house. There's one time he even threw her out of the house with a baby, and the children threw a blanket to her through the window. The children were terrified too of their dad. And so he would also humiliate her. There was a report also of how he would leave her to get onto the bus to go home from church, and he's got the children and him, they're in the car, and he would leave her there. So he was, he was doing his best to make her life very difficult.
Wow. So
gaslighting. Osinachi did not trust her own judgment. It's obvious because she would insist that he approves everything, that, ask my husband, she, in fact, it was so bad that even if she was paid in cash, she would come and give all the money to the husband. Those are the reports. And then he would give her just some peanuts, and it is her who's working. She was a great musician. She was a beautiful vocalist and a beautiful songwriter. And even the theological content of her songs, when you look at them, at least the ones I saw, was very rich. So she's somebody who was steeped in the word of God. She was a gospel minister. That is one of her descriptors. Okay, manipulation. Her husband would cancel ministry appointments and recordings arbitrarily. He did not work, but collected all her money. So he was controlling her using the money. Like I gave that example of how she flew to this place. She had money up to here. Then next, he has to send money for the taxi to go here. And when they get there, he has paid only money for sleeping, no money for food, things like that.
Did he have anxiety issues? Or is it jealousy or envy, or what the heck?
Yeah.
Was he insecure about maybe whether she might end up meeting someone else, or because he's mistreating her, she might meet someone who treats her right, What does he
Yes, those are characteristics of these characters. They are jealous, they are envious. Yes. And
Imagine,
even Czech parents were made.
jealous husbands are very dangerous. Or wives. They are.
Yes. Yeah, that's
They
true.
can be very jealous. Jealous of wives.
Yeah, whichever way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree.
If your husband is jealous of you, think twice. Jealous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or envious.
That's a red flag. The jealousy is a red flag. And that's something you identify.
There's a Kanaiska jealousy that's there. That's natural. You love someone, whatever. There's a small, but not that one about you're jealous of the career, jealous of the person's achievement, jealous of. It's because he wasn't achieving anything himself.
Yeah. It's like right now we're talking about the coercive control is a pattern of behavior. So it's repeated. It is a lifestyle. It's, it's not a one-off here and there, but it's something that is repeated. It is something that can say characterizes a relationship. Yeah. So like I said, she had no bank account of her own. So he was manipulating her. So stage 4 is a trigger. Was there a fear of separation? That is the trigger now. They do not want to be separated. Like I told you earlier, once you commit to one of these characters, you can't relinquish that commitment. So
what is the role of the church and her faith in this also?
The church and her faith?
Yeah.
Definitely her church. Her faith says, the Christianity sort of frowns on divorce. And she would say, I have to stay married to this man. But my belief was that was perhaps the easiest explanation she could give to the situation. She was in a very, very difficult situation. She leant on her faith, and yet some people were aware that she was going through a lot. And she would say, okay, he's going to change, he's going to change. And that perhaps, to my mind, sort of reflects there are conversations that they've had that he should change when he does bad things to her.
Yeah.
As in many marriages. And he would say he's going to change. So she believed he was going to change. She committed to prayer. She was a devout Christian. She committed it to prayer. But there could be some other factors which we are not aware of as to why she stayed. And like I told you, that factor is the coercive control. That is the thing that really kept her in that home. Yeah. So
let me ask you a quick question about this coercive control.
Yes.
There's a lot of people who believe that a man should control his wife.
Yes.
Yeah. And a woman should submit to the control of her husband.
Yes.
Yeah. And men are usually mocked. Some men will mock each other for saying, look, you can't even control your wife. Like, for example, let's give a little bit of a parallel here, like the Will Smith situation, Will Smith Jada situation. Yeah. Some people are looking at that as Will being weak, showing weakness, calling him a beta man, and showing weakness, and as if he could not control Jada with her red table talks. And this eventually led him to blowing up at the Oscars. So, for example, like within Nigerian society, it's very patriarchal. I've been to Nigeria like twice, and I've been around Nigeria a lot. Yeah. And so I know they're very patriarchal. And one of the things that was very saddening when I was in Nigeria was to realize about how much domestic violence there really is.
Yes.
Not so much like we have in Kenya, because in Kenya it goes beyond to murder. There's a lot of killings of women. We have a lot of femicide issues in Kenya. But in Nigeria, it almost seems to be standard practice that many women who are married, like about half of the women who are married, experience domestic violence, from their husbands. They get beaten up. Being beaten is like a normal thing for many women.
Yes.
And I was very, very, very surprised about that. You'd never imagine that in the society that this is how, how women are tolerating their marriages. The kind of behavior that they tolerate from their husbands is amazing, because of that fear of divorce and the stigma associated to women who do not remain within their marriages. So it seems like the society gives women a lot of pressure to stay in abusive
Yes.
situations. So her case in terms of being beaten or being abused doesn't seem like it's really unique or very different. I think it's
No.
just, oh, well, this is what we go through. This is what we all tolerate, just stay there and tolerate it.